I have worked with two of the biggest development banks in the world, one in Africa, one in Asia. Both billions of funding, global reach, similar mission. But walking into one felt like Silicon Valley, and walking into the other felt like I'd stepped back in time. And that difference tells you everything about how international development actually works. Today I will tell you what these institutions are, how they really work, and whether building a career with them is worth your time. Let's get into it. Let's start with something that most people don't know. The World Bank, it's not a bank in the classical sense, so that you can go there and open an account. It does not serve individuals. It serves countries. They lend money to governments of developing countries at rates no commercial bank would ever offer. And the amounts are scary. The World Bank alone approved $70 billion in a single year. And the Asian Development Bank, $29 billion in 2025 alone. These aren't aid organizations passing out donations. These are structured finance at the scale most governments can only dream of. Now, here's what most people don't know. There isn't just one of these institutions. There's an entire family of them. At the top, the World Bank and IMF, both created after World War II, in the same meeting in a small town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. 44 countries in a room trying to prevent another Great Depression. That one meeting basically designed the financial architecture the world still runs on today. The IMF became the global economy's emergency room. When a country's finance collapses, the IMF shows up with a lifeline. But there are always conditions attached, controversial conditions. The World Bank took in long-term development, roads, schools, power, grids, health systems. And then you have the regional banks. For example, ADB for the Asian Development Bank or the African Development Bank, AfDB for Africa, IADB for Latin America, and then there are many more. Same basic model, very different contexts. Now, one interesting fact about one of these banks. At ADB, every single president of the Asian Development Bank since 1966 has been Japanese. Not because of the geography, because the headquarters of ADB are based in Manila. Japan and US are the two largest shareholders, tied 15.6% each, but Japan is the single biggest contributor to ADB's development funds. Power in these institutions always follows the money. And at the end, it's a bank. So now you know what these institutions are. But here is what nobody tells you and what I only understood when I was working with two of them. From the outside, development banks look identical. Same mission statement, same organizational charts, same glossy annual reports about poverty, reduction and sustainable development. But if you work with them, you realize they couldn't be more different. At ADB, for example, everything moves fast. Deadlines are real. Deliverables are crucial. Technology maturity is high. Digital solutions, modern tools, sophisticated project management. Everything purely in English. If you're not performing, you'll know about it quickly. On the other side, the African Development Bank, the pace is entirely different. Decisions take longer, processes are more layered. French is widely spoken, not as a courtesy, but as a genuine working language, which immediately changes the dynamic if you're not fluent. I, for example, work with them and I only do speak English, so it was a bit of an issue. Then technology maturity is lower. Implementation requires more hand-holding, more patience. And here's the thing, neither is wrong. They reflect the regions they serve. Asia's fastest growing economies demand speed, innovation. African development context requires different, more relationship-driven, more politically nuanced. Okay, but here's something that these banks do that most people overlook. It's not just loans that they are giving. Development banks operate on a tiered model. The poorest country, what the system calls ADF eligible, can access grants, free money, no repayment required, because lending to a country that structurally cannot repay helps nobody. Then loans, with very low interest, very long repayment windows for lower middle income countries that can borrow but need favorable terms. And for more developed middle income countries, near market rate financing. The same bank can be given money for free to one country and to another country charge nearly commercial rates, depending entirely on where that country sits on the income scale. Can you get a grant for everything? No. Even if it's a grant where you need to pay an interest rate, it needs to be in a development context. So infrastructure, digital innovation, sustainability, health, food development, everything related to this. Beyond money, these banks also offer technical assistance to help governments design policies, build institutions, set up infrastructure or strengthen systems. And here is where specific implementation partners come in, where the development banks do the monitoring and the technical assistance. The actual implementation is done by an external provider. Also means this bank cannot fully control the success of the project. I've seen projects who have been implemented beautifully, high local engagement as well, and I've also seen projects failing. So this is where the bank comes in and also provides technical assistance and monitoring to avoid it as much as possible and to manage and control the external providers as much as possible. It's an interesting and great role, but honestly, I also know people who are struggling working with them because it's very bureaucratic. Processes are slow, everything moves slow, it's very political, external and internally politically, so you're exposed to lots of politics. And decisions are pretty much evidence-based, which is good, but can be also like super theoretically. And sometimes you need to wait years until you actually see the outcome of your work. For example, if you implemented a new policy, and that can be sometimes a bit frustrating. My honest take on this, if international development is your mission, not just a career strategy, this world is really worth it. The scale of impact you can be connected to doesn't exist in many other fields. In my next video, I'm going to deep dive into how to actually get hired by these institutions and what kind of positions exist. So make sure to subscribe and see you next week.